Okay, now, the difference between, in the Western astrology, we call, wait, one thing. If a planet is a benefic, if somebody has Jupiter in the 10th house and you start predicting fame, because Jupiter's in the 10th house and it's great fame, if that Jupiter is retrograde, you watch. It's not going to give a huge 10th house. It won't do it. If you can tell them, listen, you have the possibility to be famous if you push that career, but it will not do it on its own. So in the same way, I'd rather have a malefic retrograde in the house, I'd rather have a benefic going forward. If you have that benefic retrograde, it's not going to do as much good. But this is a mixed blessing because you have to remember it's also going to affect the houses that it rules. So it's both of them. In the West, we have fallen planets, Jupiter in Capricorn, Mars in Cancer, Sun in Libra. But we also, and that's called fallen, but we also use the term detriment.
Right.
Not when a planet is fallen, but when it's opposite its own sign. So Mercury is fallen in Pisces, but Mercury's in detriment in Sagittarius.
Right.
Or Venus is in it's exalted in Pisces, but fallen in Virgo. But Venus is not so good in Aries or Scorpio because it's opposite its own sign Libra. It's opposite its own sign Taurus. That was never taught to me. I never found it anywhere, but that absolutely, you have to see that because that absolutely works. Panoti yoga.
Even though, sorry. Even though it is aspecting its own sign, it's not considered good.
It's very good for the sign that it aspects.
But not for where it is placed.
You see, many years ago, when I first got into astrology, I said, I want to draw I'm going to draw the perfect horoscope. If I could have a horoscope for me, what would it be? You couldn't find a good horoscope. Because if I put Saturn exalted in Libra, it was going to, in 20 degrees Libra, it's going to aspect 20 degrees Aries and hurt that house. Buddha said life is suffering, get used to it. There's no perfection here. So yeah, a fallen planet is terrible, but it throws a really nice aspect on the exaltation sign. Now this is from experience. I mean, I thought to myself, this doesn't make sense. If it's fallen, it's a big disaster, and that house shouldn't benefit. But the house does benefit. It just does. If it throws it could be fallen, but if it throws an aspect on its own sign, it's going to be good, or its exaltation. Sadi Sati.
Yeah,
you know what? In my first journey to India, I don't think Santana and I even talked about Sadi Sati. I don't remember it. But anyway,
okay.
I remember going, hearing from some people that had studied astrology, and they were scared. Oh my God, Sadi Sati, 7.5 bad years. This is, you have to look at it common sense wise. They're thinking 7.5 really bad years. That's Saturn is in those 3 houses. Out of a 29-year cycle, 7.5 years, that's 1/4 of your life ruined by Sadi Sati. If Sadi Sati is so bad, it's ruined. Not to mention bad periods and bad transits. You're already ruined for 1/4. This is ridiculous.
1/4 of a cycle, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
The 1/4 of the cycle is 1/4 of your life.
30.
You have a 30-year cycle. 7.5 years ruined. The next 29 years, 7.5 years ruined.
All right, yeah.
I'm going to tell you another story. My mother died in 2012. There's 3 children. 3 children. I have the moon in Aries. One brother has the moon in Sagittarius. One brother has the moon in Gemini. None of us had Sadi Sati when she died. None of us. Anyway, Sadi Sati is, people get scared. They think it's terrible. So there is a technique, of course. P.M. Padia taught it to me. I put it in my second book, where you can find out whether Sadi Sati is going to be good. It could actually be good, mediocre, or bad. But there's a lot of calculations. But just from common sense, people should not worry about Sadi Sati. They just shouldn't. Now, when Saturn's in the house of the moon, that's not very pleasant, generally. Forget Sadi Sati. It's just Saturn transiting the moon. It's the unpleasant transit.
In this regard, what do you think about Saturn transiting over your ascendant?
I think it's bad. I think it's a lot of restriction.
Same influence like the moon.
Yeah. In other words, well, they're different. The moon is the emotions. The emotions get very sad and, like that. Saturn in the first house, I think, means by transit is that you're going to be, for 2.5 years, thinking my faults, my flaws. People are going to tell you your flaws, hey, you did that wrong. You shouldn't be this way. For 2.5 years, you're going to be thinking, oh, what am I doing wrong? Kalasarpa yoga.
Oh yeah, that's one you would like to hear.
Kalasarpa yoga is when all the planets are in between. They're on one side of the nodes. Okay? And Kalasarpa is not a good yoga, and yet many famous people have it. Many famous people. Johnny Carson, Paul McCartney, Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi, Donald Trump, a lot of people. Famous. So Kalasarpa is that you may have killed a pregnant snake in a past lifetime, which is bad. I don't take that literally. I take it symbolically. A snake represents coiled up energy. The snake is coiled up and it strikes. It's coiled up energy, and you destroyed that energy in a past life. So what does it mean?
Very interesting.
It means to me that the person wasted energy. They had talents that they didn't use, or they stopped somebody else, something where they misused energy. Forget, the idea of telling the person you killed a snake physically, they misused energy. These are the results that I have noticed, and this is how I see it. First of all, the life is extremely karmic or destined. Now use common sense. I could say to 50 different people, your life is more karmic and destined than other people. There's not one person that's going to say, no, I don't think so. Yes, I feel my life is destined. But as an astrologer, you see the lives of people that have the Kalasarpa yoga, and you see it. Their lives are more fated and destined. Secondly, the lifetime often goes way to the top and way to the bottom. Not always that extreme, like Donald Trump goes bankrupt 6 times. It's not always that Paul McCartney winds up in jail for 9 days. But they can have extreme ups and extreme downs. That's one thing. Secondly, the person, because the life is fated or destined, they have less control over certain aspects of their life. Here we go again. Get me 50 people in a room, and I'll say, have you noticed there's some areas of life over which you have no control? Yes, that's me. I can't control my marriage. I can't control my weight. I can't control my job. Everybody has that. But when you analyze, when you look at the people who have Kalasarpa, you see it. Now, the areas of control that are lost are generally, not always, but a lot of the time, connected to the houses of Rahu and Ketu. My brother, my oldest brother, had exalted Rahu in Taurus. According to Parashara, I actually go with Padya. I think Virgo is the best, Gemini is the second best for Rahu, and I think Taurus is third best. But exalted Rahu, but it's a Kalasarpa yoga. He's got Rahu in the second, in the second in Taurus, Ketu in the 8th in Scorpio, and all the rest of the planets are in between Taurus and Scorpio. Rahu in the second house, the face. He was an actor at the age of 35, 36, 37, I don't know, I can't remember the exact. He got Bell's palsy, and half of his face got paralyzed. Now, if the person has Kalasarpa yoga in the 1st and the 7th, it could be no control over confidence, the first house, or the marriage partner. If it's the third house and the ninth house, could be brothers and sisters and religious teachers, could be father. It just depends. Fourth house, 10th house, mother, homes, career. But those are the houses where the lack of control. But again, Kalasarpa Yoga it's not, you can't say absolutely you're going to have terrible, but those are, I tell them these are the potentials for the Kalasarpa Yoga. And there tends to be a little bit more physical deformity in Kalasarpa Yoga. It's just something I've seen with some.
That's a new one. That's a completely new one. It is where Rahu is placed, the physical deformity happens, or where Ketu is placed?
It could be either. It could be either. I'm going to tell you a fascinating story. I'm a gold and silver investor. The ruler of my 10th house is in the 5th, which is mental activities, and but it's also the house of investing. It's aspected by Jupiter, which is investing. In 1979-80, late 79, early 80, gold went to $800, silver went to $49. The government stepped in over the weekend around January, February 1980. They stepped in and they made a rule that said no more new contracts can be bought for silver. If you have silver contracts, you can sell them to other people, but no more new contracts will be bought. The price went from $49 to $10 in a week. I mean, they just destroyed it. I went to look what happened. On that weekend, before the Monday, Ketu was in, if I remember correctly, I haven't looked, but if I remember correctly, it was in like Aquarius, something like that. And the moon and Venus, which are silver. Gold is Sun and Jupiter, moon is Venus, and Venus and moon is silver. So here's Venus and moon in Capricorn, if I remember right, and Ketu in Aquarius, and all the rest of the planets. So moon and Venus are the first ones that are going to get hit by Ketu, and it's a Kalasarpa Yoga. And that was it. They made that rule right as moon and Venus were going to be the first planets hit because Ketu is moving backwards. So it's a fascinating story of the Rahu Kalasarpa.
Can I come back with a question, James? You mentioned earlier, a minute or two back, that Rahu in Virgo is good, second best is Gemini, third best is Taurus.
Generally.
Yeah. Now what about Ketu? Similarly, on the same analogy.
That's what I was trying to say. When I go to the spiritual movements, I keep seeing Ketu in Virgo.
Okay.
Ketu in Gemini. Okay. Ketu, that's what I see more than anything. And then I see Ketu with benefics. Having Ketu with Mercury, Jupiter, Venus close is just as good as having Ketu in Virgo or Gemini. Now, when it comes to Scorpio, I have to tell you, I don't see many planets function well in Scorpio.
Why?
Why, I don't know. I do the horoscope. There's a planet there. It's a Venus. It's a Jupiter. It's a Mars. It's a this. It's a that. Mars, yes. Most planets cannot handle the Scorpio energy, in my experience. That's just, I see Mercury in Scorpio. It doesn't function well. Very few planets function well. Saturn in Scorpio is going to cause more problems than it does elsewhere, in my experience. I don't know. I don't know why. It's my experience. Okay, Chandra Lagna. Planets, viewing planets from the point of view of the moon. You know, there's only so much you can do in astrology. Looking at a horoscope, unless it's your own horoscope and you're going to spend years on it, there's only so much you can do in a reading. I really don't do much with Chandra Lagna. I do it with transits. I want to look at the transits from the moon. I have enough to look at without Chandra Lagna, but I never, ever, never, ever, never, ever miss if I see a planet 7 houses from the moon.
7 from moon.
If Saturn is 7 houses from the moon, it's like having Saturn in the 7th house. If Venus is 7 houses from the moon, it's like having Venus in the 7th house. If Mercury is in the 7th, you've got to look at that. Now, if the moon is 3 degrees of Libra and Mercury's 28 degrees of Aries, it's not going to be that strong, but it's going to be there. But if it's Moon is 10 degrees, then Mercury's 14 degrees, opposite sign, believe me, that's going to be as strong as anything in the 7th house. It's going to be as strong. It is absolutely critical.
Can you give us an example, maybe a hypothetical example or something from your?
Yeah, I'll give you a good one. My wife, I've had 2 wives. They both had Jupiter 7 houses from the Moon.
Okay.
Now, I'll give you another example. My second wife is married twice. She's got her Jupiter. My first wife, Jupiter was in Aries and Moon was in Libra. So she got a spiritual partner, even though the 7th house had nothing about that. 7th house ruler was Saturn. It was in the 2nd house of money and education. But Jupiter was 7 houses from the Moon. Second wife has Moon in Virgo, Jupiter in Pisces. So she not only has Jupiter in the 7th house, she's got Jupiter in Pisces in the 7th house. First husband is a spiritual teacher with a movement. He was more like a movement, had a big spiritual.
Okay.
Second husband was me. Now, what does she have in her 7th house? Exalted Mars in Capricorn and the Sun. These are 2 malefics. One's exalted. So, and then it's a little more complicated because that looks pretty rough. But the 7th ruler is Saturn, and it's in Aquarius in the 8th with Venus. So if you forget about the Jupiter, you could say, oh, she gets a partner who is successful because it's an exalted Mars, but there could also be a lot of energy and fieriness. Partner could be very strong-willed or bossy. But then the ruler of the 7th is Saturn. It's in the 8th. So he could be with astrology, and it's with Venus. So he's artistic, and these are the good things. But nowhere does it indicate a spiritual, nowhere does it indicate a spiritual partner who writes a book on enlightenment. Nowhere. Except Jupiter in Pisces, 7 houses from the Moon. This, believe me, this is really typical. You're doing a chart, Jupiter's in the 7th house, Moon's in the 7th house, great marriage, and it's terrible. And then you see Mars, Saturn, the Sun, even the Sun in the 7th from the Moon. It's not good. Now, another thing I want to say before you ask a question, because I'm going to forget. Another thing I'm going to say is this. It's a completely different subject, but it keeps coming to my mind. When you analyze the mother, everybody knows to look at the 4th house and the Moon. They always forget Mercury. Mercury is a karaka for the mother as much as the Moon. It's very easy to forget. Now, okay, let me just give an example first. So you're going to see charts where the 4th house looks okay, the Moon looks okay, and the person's mother is terrible. Mercury is burned. Mercury is fallen. Mercury is like that. Best guess, because all I ever saw was in the scriptures that it would say Mercury and Moon, not the scriptures, my teachers taught me, Mercury and Moon, karaka of mother. I said, Mercury? Yeah, Mercury. And it works. Where I believe it comes from is that Mercury is the nervous system. So where do you get your nervous system? I think you get it from your mother. You're in your mother's womb. And if your mother's a nervous wreck, your nervous system gets wrecked. That's my best guess. But I'm telling you that if you ignore Mercury, you'll not get the mother correct.
I mean, whatever you say, James, is gospel, because you have had your experience over decades of seeing horoscopes, and I think this is something new. All of us are learning about Mercury and being connected to.
This was taught to me from Padia or Santana. It's there. Listen, it's people there's too much information. There's too much information. It's easy. Look, the karakas. I mean, you open up this book. It'll tell you the karaka. There's a page in here which says karakas for planets. You go to the 4th house. It'll say, there's so much information that it's very, very easy to just forget certain things. But it is there. But you have to find what works. If it works and it's there, then, you know.
In that regard, let me go back one more time, because you were talking about the seventh from moon and second marriage or first marriage. Do you consider first and second marriage from same point, from the seventh house, or you have a different view upon that?
The horoscope is the horoscope. So in the same way, someone who was born 5 feet tall is not going to play basketball because they're short. They're never going to get tall. If you have, let's say you have Saturn in the seventh house, and maybe it's even fallen in Aries, relationships are always going to be difficult. They're always going to be, the nature of Saturn is that you give, and the partner takes and takes. That's going to be the pattern. That's going to be the pattern. Will the second one be as bad? Probably not. The person grows and, you know, but it's always going to have that nature. That's not going to stop. If you have Mercury, I have Mercury 7 houses away from the moon. And both of my wives are they're intelligent, and they're very mental.
Yes.
So that doesn't go away. Okay. Then you have the houses for the second marriage and the third house. Second marriage, third marriage, fourth marriage. It's not one of the techniques that works very well for me. I was taught 7th house, 9th house, 11th house would be yeah. I won't bet much money on that. In fact, I don't use it anymore. I used it for a year or two, and I said, this doesn't work. If it works for you, be my guest. Here's another thing that doesn't work. In the Varga charts, the divisional charts, I used those charts as charts, the whole chart, for a good 4 or 5 years. They didn't work. So for the career, I just look at the 10th house, planets in the 10th house, the ruler of the 10th house, and where it is. That's all I look at. And the first house, a little bit. If it's marriage, I look at the planets in the 7th house. Where is the ruler of the 7th house? I don't use aspects. I don't use the rest of the chart, and I get very good results. But if I use the chart as a whole, it doesn't work. And I have done this for 20 years because occasionally I will go back and say, maybe I'm wrong. I have a lot more experience. Let me go back. Still doesn't work. And the one that I do use works very well.
So let me get this right, because I wanted to ask this as a question, because I think around 10 years back I was told by one of my friends from US that you don't go much deep into divisional charts. Navamsha is the max that you go. Is that correct?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I use the Dasamsha and the Navamsha. Those are the ones that I use.
That's it.
Others, many of the others, the timing, the birth time has to be real accurate because they're more time sensitive. But those are the ones I use. You know, other people, you know, if you get good results, you get the results the way you get them. If those Vargas work for you, that's fine. But that's what I use.